Wednesday, September 7th at 6:26 p.m. My name is Ryan Austin. I am the chairperson of the Public Works Committee. We'll do a quick roll. To my right, Public Works Director, Mr. Joe Terry, City Engineer, Joe Eichstead, Alderperson Dean Veneman, Committee Member Matt Zacher, Alderperson Tom Rayom, Committee Member Patrick Delaney, Alderperson Jay Bemke, and Finance Tim DeSorsi. Item number 1, call the meeting to order. The meeting is now called to order. Item number 2, review 8th Street State Municipal Agreement for the repaving of 8th Street South from the South City limits to Whitrock Ave. Mr. Terry.
Thank you. A quick background on this one. Annually, the state evaluates the surface conditions of connecting highways in Wisconsin, and 8th Street is part of the connecting highway system. Based on the state's evaluation, the pavement on 8th Street from Lakewood Lane to Whitrock Avenue has deteriorated and is reaching the end of its service life. Additionally, the existing crosswalk curb ramps do not meet ADA standards. The first step in enumerating the project is formally approving a state and municipal finance agreement. If approved, the city will be responsible for 25% of the project design, 0% for real estate acquisitions, if any, and 0% for roadway construction. The city must perform any real estate work and make the initial purchase, and the state would reimburse those expenses at the end of the project. Any special non-participating features, such as, those are things that are special for Wisconsin Rapids that wouldn't otherwise meet the DOT standards. So, for example, a center turn lane for private entrances. If we had underground sanitary or water utilities, those are 100% city or utility local cost. The project is roughly estimated to cost about $5.7 million, with the city's portion of design engineering work about $100,000. Through the design process, this could change, and the agreement does require the city to accept any changes. That can be a little frustrating because that's without warning, but typically it stays pretty close. The project's tentatively scheduled for construction in 2028, but could be moved up to 2026. Before the state can enumerate the project, the state municipal financial agreement needs to be signed and on file with the state. And so staff's looking for some action to make a motion to accept the state municipal financial agreement for project ID 6999-03-13, 83 for State Highway 13 8th Street south from Lakewood Lane to Whitrock Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Terry. Any questions or comments from committee? So, do we have an estimated cost of what it's going to be on the city's portion? Obviously, we have some center turn lanes and there's some infrastructure that we're going to look at potentially replacing with the road being opened up there. Do you have any numbers put together on that at all?
So I've talked to the water utility. The utilities on the south end of town in that area are relatively new and not in need of replacement. The sanitary sewer, the water main does not need to be replaced. So there may be some manhole repairs, some things like that. Any storm sewers covered by the state on this project are our storm sewer main. Does not need rehabilitation in that area. The street lights and wiring for those does, but fortunately that's part of the DOT's design and DOT's responsibility. The only time that would come into play where that would be a city responsibility is if the city wanted poles or appurtenances that weren't DOT standards. So for example, our downtown lighting wouldn't meet DOT standards. This is, but we're not planning decorative down in that area anyway. So we are evaluating that. Wastewater is going to televise everything just to be sure, but most everything down on that end of town is in PVC. So long answer to a short question, no, we do not anticipate any substantial utility work in conjunction with this particular project. The next stretch north, that's a whole different story. That's what I wish was being looked at now, but unfortunately, it's not how the DOT looks at these projects. It's strictly based on surface quality and ride conditions, so this is hopefully the first of several projects to freshen up 8th Street.
Yeah, unfortunately, a little less than 3/4 of a mile being replaced?
Right.
Yes. Okay. Any other questions by council? Hearing none, what are the committee's wishes? Okay, I'll make a motion to accept the state municipal financial agreement for project ID 6999-03-13, 83 for South 13 8th Street South from Lakewood Lane to Whitrock Ave.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other questions or discussion? Take it to vote. All in favor, respond with aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, on to item number 3, discuss and consider an ordinance creating Chapter 51 and amending Chapter 6 of the Wisconsin Rapids Municipal Code regarding creation of a transportation utility. Mr. Terry?
A little background on this one. At the July 6th Public Works Committee meeting, action was taken to direct staff to finalize the draft transportation utility ordinance. Staff met with Mayor Blazer and Attorney Schill over the course of the past 2 months to create a proposed final draft. A number of small changes were made from the draft copy that you had in July for consistency with statutes and clarity. The goal of the city included 3 key objectives. Number 1, to reduce or eliminate special assessments for street and sidewalk reconstruction projects. Number 2, to reduce or eliminate borrowing for annual reconstruction projects. And number 3, advance towards a sustainable transportation system. This proposed ordinance, using the proposed transportation utility model, checks all 3 boxes. As compared to the draft ordinance reviewed in July, a scope change is proposed to 51.10 paragraph 3 for the assessed party fee. Staff had initially recommended people fitting the definition of an assessed party would receive a 25% discount from the transportation utility fee to recognize their burden of currently having a special assessment. Since their assessment covers 25% of the cost of the street and a 25% reduction in the fee made logical sense, that's what was recommended at the time. However, the actual cost reduction would have been minimal. For example, if the utility fee for a single-family home is currently proposed would be about $101 a year or $8.44 a month. An assessed party would only receive a $2.11 per month discount or $25.32 a year. So as a result, staff is recommending that an assessed party would receive a 100% credit in the form of a credit for fees for the duration that they are or could have been paying their special assessment. That credit maximizes the benefit to the assessed party. It nearly eliminates the administration that would otherwise be required to track for the next up to 15 years. And after it is initially applied, all users are treated the same, which is recommended by the Eller's report, if you had a chance to read that in the packet. So while the topic of a transportation utility has been discussed regularly for the last 20-plus months, staff's recommending a public comment agenda item for September and/or October at the Common Council meeting to formally request public input. Also, Chapter 2.3D allows an ordinance to be voted on and passed at its first reading if the vote is unanimous. Given the potential impact of this proposed ordinance and to assure at a minimum that it would be read at 2 Common Council meetings, staff's recommending the committee introduce the ordinance in September but not vote on it and then consider action in October. Attorney Schill may have some comment on that. Given the amount of coordination with water works and lighting, required to implement billing. If the ordinance is passed in October, staff believes the utility could start billing in January of 2022. Staff will need at least 2 months after the ordinance is passed to evaluate some complicated parcels and finalize the model. I would say right now the model's at about kind of an 85% level so that we have a taste of what it would look like, but there are some final analysis that would need to be done to fine tune it in order to actually implement it. So as a result, if the ordinance is not passed in October and is still being considered, staff would recommend the utility start billing at the beginning of the quarter, at least 2 months after the ordinance is approved. If the utility ordinance is approved, the city will need to bond for 1 year following the start of the utility, where the utility grows its reserves sufficient to fund at least 1 year of utility projects. For example, if the utility begins collections January 1 of 2022, the city would need to bond for routine construction activities in 2022, but not in 2023. If the utility begins collections on July 1st, 2022, the city would need to bond for 2022 and the first half of 2023. If the committee advances the ordinance, staff recommends dropping special assessments for any projects where preliminary resolutions have been made but not final resolutions. And so the action that the staff is requesting the committee to consider is to make a motion to accept the proposed Transportation Utility Ordinance, Chapter 51 as read or as amended. To make a motion to introduce the Transportation Utility Ordinance at the September Common Council meeting and to consider action then at the October Common Council meeting. Make a motion to notice a specific public comment period at the September and/or October Common Council meetings. And to make a motion to eliminate special assessments for any projects where assessment hearings and final resolutions are outstanding at the time the transportation utility is approved.
Thank you, Mr. Terry. Any questions or comments by committee?
I would like to mention, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I would like to mention, and our finance director is here. I'm not sure if everybody had a chance to review his email that contained the two examples of debt, one with and one without the transportation utility. If not, I have some extra copies. But what that demonstrates is that one of the questions that has been raised is, well, what might this save the taxpayer? Because now we're looking at a fee versus property taxes. While the fee is dependent on the property use, property taxes are not. And on a $100,000 valued property, the savings would be about $162.87 per year. Obviously, if the parcel's worth more than that, there's more savings, and if it's worth less than that, there's less savings, versus continuing to go down the path that we currently are, where we're taking on general obligation debt for our annual projects. Does anybody need a copy of this? Does everyone have theirs? Yeah.
Mr. Delaney.
Okay, I have a few questions on this. I was wondering, one, if we could split up the transportation utility creation feasibility study, and then also discuss the Chapter 51 that is being proposed. I do have some questions on this study. Is there somebody here that can answer my questions on this? Okay. On page 4, it talks about the scenario 2 minus and 2 plus. The 2 minus is the...
Go ahead, I'm listening.
Sure. The 2 minus is the property tax levy, and which is our current scenario, that's what I understand. The 2+ would be with the transportation utility. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, so the 2-, initially, when Ellers and R.E. Smith were performing this analysis, scenario 2 included our annual construction work and our maintenance activities. And so 2- is minus those annual maintenance activities. That was discussed, that there could be some risk to the city if at some point in time this ordinance is challenged, and if it's defeated and the city has pulled its maintenance activities out of the general fund, we wouldn't be able to put them back in the general fund. Whereas with the construction work that we're currently borrowing for, we just go back to borrowing for it again in the future. So that was what was pulled out. The plus part was to try to incorporate a step towards sustainability. And that was adding, besides our regular annual reconstruction work, is to add $450,000 that would be used towards resurfacing projects. And that's a component of our street maintenance that we don't currently have. We typically chip seal, crack fill, do some patching, but we generally don't do a whole lot of resurfacing. And that component's pretty important if we want to try to time the life of our roads and plan their obsolescence so that they're obsolete the same time that the underground infrastructure is. So that's the plus part.
Okay. So 2- is current tax levy, is that right? And then the plus would be with the transportation utility. Okay. On page 10, it shows about halfway down, scenario 2- for the churches says the current monthly utility charge is $34.54, and then that would go up with the 2+ scenario at $43.69. Shouldn't that be 0 under the current 2- scenario?
So these are scenarios for a transportation utility. So 2- is taking what we currently spend for our projects, and instead of bonding for them annually, the utility's covering those costs. So that's 2-. 2- is leaving maintenance in the general fund and having the transportation utility pay for our reconstruction work annually. The plus is a $450,000 more than that. So both of these are new transportation utility fees. One is just doing 8/10, 9/10 of a mile like we currently are, and the other adds almost a mile of resurfacing to that. Gets us closer to that 3 miles a year that would make us sustainable.
Okay, so in this one, the 2- and 2+ represent something different? Is that what I understand?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments by
Oh,
committee?
I'm not done yet. I'm
Oh.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll be a while. Okay, so with the increase in road construction to 3 miles, is that represented in this transportation feasibility study at all?
That would be scenario 5.
But
Oh, I'm
that's,
sorry.
that-
That's scenario 3. I'm sorry. That's scenario 3.
that's really not discussed much in this because they discussed typically.
Right,
or
because-
mainly just the number 2.
Right, because in July, the focus was recognizing that going from where we are to where we need to be is going to be an evolutionary process. It both on a staff basis and a financing basis isn't something that can happen immediately. That needs to happen over a period of time. And so the proposal, the transportation utility allows the city to become sustainable as it wishes, and the recommendation for the 2+ lets us take a step in that direction, part of that evolutionary process to get to sustainability.
I have no more questions about the feasibility study, if anybody else does. Other than that, I would like to talk about Chapter 51, when you got time.
Go ahead, Mr. Lenny.
Okay, Chapter 51. Okay. 5108 point, sub 4, there is a Wisconsin statute 66.0672, which does not exist. It was a typo, should be 66.0627. Also, there is a spelling error in that. Okay, another thing I'd like to discuss would be the vacancy fee credit. And that is 51.10 sub 2. My concern with this is that people are going to, anybody that has to go down south, or doesn't have to, but they go down south for the winter, they're going to be calling in, making sure they get their $5 credit or whatever it comes out to for that. All the while we're still, the property is still being used, or can be used. I just think that that should be, it's going to add a lot to administrative time, and I think that should be taken out.
I guess I have a comment on that. You can take a look. I thought we had some language in there, but I'm not seeing it off right at the surface that there's a fee associated with changing. But I guess the issue is that one of the things we want to accomplish is that recognizing that if a transportation utility is basing its fees on use of property, and use of property is generally defined and evaluated through a manual, that use of property is consistent with the actual traffic that is using that facility. The mill would be an example. That if the mill is vacant, it wouldn't be appropriate for the city to charge that property owner as if it weren't. But I'll have to take a look because I thought we had a fee in there to make a change. And
Is there any way to do it, so say assessors, what they do is they go by January 1st, whatever the property is on January 1st of the year, that's what it is for the year. I think that's a fair way to do it. We can also discuss other ideas. I just don't think that having,
I think the appeal fee was intended to be $150 if someone wants to appeal their use or whatever, and that a typical homeowner wouldn't recoup that since the fee for the whole year is likely to be less than that. That they wouldn't recoup that and it wouldn't be worth the time to track it. We can certainly take a look at it, but I do think it's very important that that the ordinance recognize that land use can change, and that the city has provisions for those changes to be accounted for so that the billing process is as fair as it can be, recognizing that there would be some administrative burdens there. But the administrative time and effort to deal with that is something that can be charged. And I'll have to reread the language. I think that was the intent, that if it was a vacancy request, that was going to be treated as a change and would require the $150 fee. And if it's a high traffic location, that fee's nominal. Either way, it's realistic. But if it's a homeowner or someone's going to be gone for the winter months, even if it's a office space and a tenant's moving out, they may have a new tenant within 3 months or whatever. So that was really the reason for the 3-month minimum. But at the end of the day, it's the council's ordinance, so we can certainly change it at your will.
On the last page of the draft, the appeal administrative fee is listed as $150.
Right.
All right, also, okay, on the last one, 51.13, I think should be removed, just for the fact that I don't think that this represents any, okay, so what it does is it cites Wisconsin statute section 66.0199. That's a missed error again. It's supposed to be 66.0119, pertaining to special warrants. Now, special warrants are used for safety and stuff like that. I think something like this does not qualify for that. I think that should be removed in its entirety.
Mr. Terry, would you like to touch on that?
Yeah, I believe that's the same statute that's used for building inspectors and things like that. And so if there is a traffic count or something that someone's proposing, this gives the city the opportunity to, inspect, what they're doing as far as count, that type of thing. So I mean, this is pretty standard, and it can't be just for anything. We can't go on a property and search the property when we're trying to figure out traffic counts. So it's, it's specific to this purpose.
What this talks about is people who deny entry. So I don't think that's very standard, and it should not be a part of this. I make a motion that we remove 51.13.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Right. What I think what she's getting at is that you would, you would make a motion to approve it with changes, and those changes would include the changes that you want.
Then I take back that motion. Okay, one last thing. So throughout this, section 51 talks about the assessed property, the assessed places. And it also talks about then if somebody wants to appeal, that then they would go to Director of Public Works. I also talked with our assessor, and our assessor said that as far as categorizing properties or having it done, I think that, I talked with him and he said that that would be fine and it would be at no additional cost to the city. I just think that having the assessor, which the language in here talks a lot about the properties, what better person to assess categories than the assessor who's been in every property in the city.
Yeah, so the challenge there is then the assessor would need to become competent in the transportation model and understand how it works, and would be the person then that anyone would come to with questions about changing. And because it's transportation related, it's an engineering manual. That's why the recommendation is for questions, changes, appeals to bounce off of the engineering department staff, because they're the ones that'll be the experts in understanding that manual, understanding traffic counts, understanding that language. And then if the party is still aggrieved, it would go then to the Public Works Committee and not the assessor. The assessor isn't familiar with traffic counts and traffic modeling and traffic analysis.
Don't we just have categories for these? Like, you have your, as explained in here, you have the churches, you've got fast food, you've got residential. How many categories are we talking about?
Well, there's hundreds of categories and thousands of subcategories based on the curves in the manual. So it's not arbitrary. It's very specific.
I never said it was arbitrary.
Right. So it's for a residential property, that's pretty arbitrary. But if it's for a business, there's a number of things that, depending on the type of use, there's a number of different equations that are used. I think I sent a copy of an example out that has the scatter plot and the statistical graph with the equations. So those are things that need to be analyzed. And if there's an appeal, the appeal generally, one of the accepted methods of appeal is substantiating a position with a traffic study. Again, these aren't things that your assessor's typically accustomed to.
And I could just interject a little bit with experience with the stormwater utility. In the past, we have consulted with the assessor from time to time for land use type information. It's not very often, but for instance, we charge differently for a single family residence than a duplex. And so if a house is actually operating as a upper lower, we'll charge differently than single family. So that's, I guess, one scenario where we've consulted with the assessor. Which, from time to time, there might be instances in this case as well.
Yeah, so you already talked with the assessor. I think that the assessor would be the best person. He's a very diplomatic person. I just think as far as reaching out to the Public Works Director, I don't think that, as far as residents are concerned, I don't think that reaching out to the Public Works Director is the best thing. Mr. Terry has publicly called residents idiots, stuff like that. I don't think that he was really somebody that business owners or residents should be reaching out to.
Mr. Blazer.
Bear with me, please. So it was suggested to me that maybe I reach out to some other municipalities that have a transportation utility. Joe emailed me a very nice big list today, and so I started calling, and so I called the village of Pewaukee, who is pretty much, I think, maybe a few months ahead of us, maybe 6 months ahead of us. October 1st, they're going to start their first bill. So the reason why I reached out, I just kind of wanted to find out if they've run into problems that they may have not considered, or maybe they would have done something differently if they would have had an opportunity to redo it. So Pewaukee wasn't a very good choice. I also called Nina, but she hadn't called me back, the mayor. So I thought, I'll call Oregon, because there was Oregon City, Oregon, and they have a population of 36,000. They created their utility in 2008, so they've been around for a while. I spoke to a gentleman by the name of Jason, and he would be the guy that the community would call if there was a problem or a question with their utility. So he didn't have a lot of historical knowledge. So he referred me to their public works director, John. And John has been there since the creation of this. And I asked him that question, and he said, all I can start by saying is this has been highly successful for our community. That was his first words. And I asked him, well, then, do you have any suggestions for a community that's starting out in something like this? He said what they found is they incorporated automatically a 3% increase in the original ordinance, and it took a lot of the debate about every year council having to discuss that. So that was one thing that he recommended, was an automatic increase. And they also said a thing that really has helped their communication with the public has been a creation of an annual report, like kind of a list of the accomplishments that they found because of the utility, and somehow the costs were broken down. So I was very appreciative. And then I thought, well, I'll call another one. It was Austin, Texas. So it's kind of a big place. So I called down there, and they referred me to their transportation utility department. So they've got a big department. And then I started Googling a little more, and they have about as many employees as we have in the city of Wisconsin Rapids. So I thought, it's probably not a good comparison. And so then I went back to Oregon, which has been pretty good. And I talked to a public works director out there. And commonly, I spoke to public works directors regarding this. They also have used the TRIP model, and they talked about the engineering book. And so this in Newburgh City, Oregon, they have about 23,000 population. They created their ordinance in 2017. And so I was talking to her, and I said, what are those difficulties that you've encountered? And she said the biggest difficulty that they've encountered right now is that when a business leaves midway through the year, how they capture that business change. They have a business license there, but they have the same troubles as we do, trying to decide, or trying to get people to fill out licenses. And she said they haven't really come up with a good way of how to tackle those business changes mid-year. And she also said that if we include a hardship exemption, because they do have a hardship exemption in there, like if I have a property but I don't own a vehicle, I think they had another criteria, but she said what they run into is getting proof that there is a reason for an exemption. So I kind of ended it there, but those were some of the things that I had encountered today when I spoke to these people. But they definitely thought it was very positive. They struggle though, because obviously you compare Wisconsin to Oregon, it's a whole different system, and how they generate revenue is different, and they don't have special assessments like we use here. These were just they didn't create theirs as a replacement option. It just became that option. I provided Joe with some questions ahead of time from Alderperson Evanson because she was not able to be here. And I see I have an email from the group on 18th Avenue that's pretty active. So on, I guess on Ms. Evanson's, some of her concerns were, one of them was that her concern is that, with businesses in the community, she's concerned that, is it potentially a driving cost that might drive away businesses? And also the concern being that if, as a resident, I'm paying a transportation utility and I'm going to the businesses and I'm potentially paying part of that transportation utility there. So her concern was potentially being charged twice. I don't know if anybody wants to respond, but I just want to make sure to get her concerns out there. Also, I'm sorry,
Yeah, I can respond to
Cool.
the second one. Well, and the first one too, just for, perspective, I guess, for a business, a trip is a vehicle arriving, a trip is a vehicle leaving. So, if you're visiting a place, it's 2 trips. So at the end of the day, as long as the measure is consistent, the city tries to define this is the dollar amount that we're trying to get for the year. The number of trips, as long as it's consistent, is all that matters. It's about 3 cents, between 3 and 4 cents a trip. So, if you had a car with a single customer in it and you wanted to try to figure out, well, what am I looking at? That might be a way to consider that. So as far as paying for multiple trips, it's not that you're being charged twice because that trip is being consistently applied. And the concern about, you had mentioned the one city had a hardship clause. The one thing that's important to remember is a trip is not just a trip that the owner takes.
Right.
A trip is a trip that serves the property. So if the post office delivers mail, that's a couple trips, one there, one away. Garbage collection, FedEx truck, UPS, the taxi that you take if you don't have a car. So those are all factored in to that number. And the recommendation is that there aren't exemptions that you can't otherwise justify. Like the vacancy exemption was one that we felt we could justify. But that's also why we suggested that a credit be applied for someone an assessed party versus it continuing on. Because once the credit's applied, it's done. Every customer is treated then the same thereafter.
Thank you. And then she had a question. So if I was, and I think Tim might have responded to, is if I lived on a street currently that's in limbo here and I sell my house, how does that work? Because if I go to sell my house, there's going to be this notice of a special assessment on my property. And I believe the way Tim explained it is that, does the city hold on to that? And then what happens with that money? And because I may be part of the trip utility, not have any special assessment when everything's said and done, but in the meantime, there still is that notice on your title that there's a potential special assessment.
Sure, I can address that. Every once in a while, we'll get that where there's a pending special assessment on a property. They go to sell it. The title company usually sends us a request for any outstanding special assessments or any pending special assessments. And usually what happens is when the buyer and seller close on the property, that'll be worked in, whatever that assessment amount is, it's usually an estimated amount, is included in the closing, and the title company will send us a check for that. What we do is when we get that in the finance department, since it hasn't been officially billed yet, we put that in a liability account, and then once the invoice is issued, then we apply that money towards that special assessment invoice. in this case, if we received a payment from a title company on a pending special assessments, but special assessments were eliminated, then we would probably, we would contact the title company and say, whoever got credit for that special assessment payment, we would refund that, either the buyer or the seller.
Sounds good, thank you. And I think maybe if, Joe, if you could explain a little bit about, that this transitional period of me paying off my special assessment and that 5, 10-year, 15-year gap that, so that maybe the council and the public can kind of understand how that limbo will be taking place.
Right, so what's proposed is that if someone has a special assessment, currently, the final resolution's been approved, they've got a bill, they know what their assessment is, they're going to pay it on their tax roll every year, that process is done. If the person paid it in full, but could have paid it over, say, maybe they've got 8 years, they had the option to pay it over 10 years, there's 8 years left. What's proposed here is that you'd get a credit of whatever the transportation utility fee would be for 8 years. And you'd start off then with a, with a balance, with a credit balance in your account, your utility account. If you would sell your property 2 weeks later, that credit would be then received by the property owner. Could be applied towards other utility bills, whatever that property owner so chooses. Over time then, when the monthly utility bill shows up, it would be deducted from that credit until it became zero and became a negative balance. But that way, everybody gets the same bill. Some may have a credit, some may not. There's a limitation proposed that the credit can't exceed the actual assessment. Now, that's not an issue for a typical homeowner. Most construction assessments are, $3,000 to $10,000. And so if it's $100 a year, the credit would be about $1,000 for 10 years. So you wouldn't exceed that. But a business that has a lot of traffic, a Walmart, something like that, if you were to apply this directly, it could be a $100,000 credit. And so the objective was to, not to make up for the fact that there's a special assessment. The city used its police powers to specially assess. The city could let those run its course. The theory here is to recognize the burden of special assessments and not apply that burden to the property owner for the duration that they could have been paying that special assessment. So the idea or the recommendation is to limit that amount to no more than what the actual assessment was.
Thank you.
I think also she had a question about, well, what about someone who just got done paying,
Right. Yep.
right? They would be treated just like everybody else in the city. Property owners, there's probably some property owners that had special assessments 30, 40 years ago. If that time period was up now or 5 years ago, that doesn't matter. It would just be for special assessments where they're currently paying, or they could be currently paying towards a special assessment. Once the property sells, that assessment has to be cleared up. At the same time, there's no more, the credit gets cleared up at the same time automatically. So it makes it fairly, not as administratively burdensome as what rolled across the desk in July.
So I just thought of another question while we were sitting here. So what if I live on a corner lot and the city does Chase Street and the next year come back and do 18th Avenue? Is it, because my property is only assessed, I guess, whichever side I'm on. So if I'm on 18th Avenue, I wouldn't be really assessed for Chase, would I?
Yes, so if you're on a corner lot, under our current ordinance, you'd be assessed for both.
Oh, okay.
What's proposed right now in this proposed ordinance is that since the 18th Avenue project isn't complete, and the final cost won't be known, and the final assessment hearing wouldn't take place then until spring of 2022, what's proposed is that if this is approved, that no special assessment final no further special assessment final hearings for these types of projects would take place. So, you know, in a way, the projects this year, those folks would be getting out of a special assessment, just like then anyone in 2022 as well.
So technically, I would be, you know, under the special assessment, the 10, 15-year assessment, where I wouldn't, I think
Correct.
Chase and 18th Avenue will be a unique situation, but.
Yep.
But realistic, or you know, ultimately, this year's projects that have not been final resolution will probably be considered under the utility and not get to a final resolution unless this ordinance is not passed for a significant amount of time or something along those lines.
Correct. And if there was another location where they had a special assessment that's 8 years old, there's 2 years left on it, and they're on a corner lot, and the other street got done, and there's 10 years on that one, well, then it's 10 years of relief.
Yeah.
It's for the, you know, whatever their longest duration assessment that remains.
Sounds good. I think that's everything. Thank you.
Any other questions by committee? Mr. Zacher?
I might repeat a few questions here. For the storm sewer utility, maybe I should know this. Who's the head of that utility?
The city engineer.
The city engineer. And I guess that was kind of the question, like, is the way this thing kind of reads, like, the public works director, being you right now, is you're going to be like the head of the transportation utility?
Yes. Most likely, I'll end up delegating work to the engineering staff, but
Can I ask why that was kind of decided on?
just because I'm the head of the department.
Okay. Is there another way we could have went with that? It doesn't seem necessarily like that would be necessarily your role, but just curious if there was another way we could go with that.
I mean,
You don't have
I
to
think-
answer it
I
right
think
now
you-
either.
I think you could probably have it the responsibility of the engineering department. Ultimately, I'm responsible for that department. But that would probably be the only two that I would recommend. Again, just because of the, you know, typical questions, typical knowledge of transportation is that staff is myself or the engineering department.
So like if people are, because we're going to have lots of people coming in, then my next question is going to be about, you know, the people coming in, public comment. So we're going to have a lot of people asking a lot of questions, and they're not all going to be coming to you, right? Like,
Right.
they're confused about stuff, are they all going to be coming to you for answers to what's going on with the utility?
Oh, it's just like any other utility questions. They'll call the department. I'll get a message, and I'll either answer it directly or delegate it to staff to answer the question.
Okay. So then going, what we're being asked of right now, if I understand this right, is to say we want to make a motion to accept the ordinance, chapter 51, that is written down right now, what we received, unless
Or as
we
you
make
want to amend
changes to
Right,
it.
right.
Sorry. But if we do that, are we saying that this is set, this is the ordinance as proposed that we're accepting before we even talk to the people in the community?
Well, that's why I'm suggesting, with the city's ordinance, it requires two readings for a change of ordinance, requires two readings. Unless there's a unanimous vote, then it only requires the first reading. And what staff is suggesting is that, well, in all likelihood, there's going to be a nay vote. But let's make sure that there's going to be two readings. So I guess what staff is suggesting is to, if the committee feels that the ordinance is satisfactory, introduce it at the September Common Council meeting, and then vote on it at the October Common Council meeting. That'll satisfy the requirement that there's two readings, but it'll negate the possibility of it being approved at the first reading, because there won't be a vote. It'll have to be read twice and reviewed at two Common Council meetings. And that gives the public time for public comment in September. And if there's a desire to make some changes so that hopefully then in October, if it's ready, you could vote on it as it's in the process of being implemented. If there's something that, that's something that we just didn't anticipate, or something that we discovered, it can come before the council and get voted on again. You can change and amend ordinances as you see fit.
Okay.
Any other questions by committee or council?
Yeah, I have one. So I just want to confirm what you were just saying. So then, in effect, if we voted on this, I read in the thing, so in October, that would give you enough time to enact it on 1/1/22?
Yes.
Or for 22 prod?
Yes.
Okay.
What are the committee's wishes?
Well, I would like to see some changes made before we, approve it as written. And I'm not real sure on how to go about that.
He's wondering about how to craft his motion to approve the ordinance with changes.
Right, I make a motion to approve the ordinance as presented with the following changes, and then list the changes, and then if you get a second, then they will vote on that.
You need a minute?
Yeah, please.
Yes, go ahead.
At the time of the stormwater utility, we did not have a public works director, so the city engineer was kind of the head, so that's why I believe the city engineer was listed. And in looking at other ordinances, it's very common that the director of public works is the person. And as Joe said, it's very common you put that person, you put that department, but that doesn't mean that he is fielding every call and fielding every complaint and doing everything, but it's a recognition of that department is the one that's administering the utility, so.
I make a motion that we approve Chapter 51, taking out 51.13, inspection of premises, and replacing Public Works Director with City Engineer.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? So on this motion, do you also want to include holding it over to the October Common Council for a second reading?
Yes.
Mr. Blazer?
Joe, at what point will we see a table of all the charges, I guess? So, the community can then see that and have that discussion.
So I guess what we were planning on is if this moved forward, I have asked R.A. Smith to put together, because they've satisfied their contract obligations. There is some legwork to do to hammer out some of the fine details. And so I've asked them to put together a proposal, kind of a time and materials and time estimate to assist with that endeavor. Just because our engineering staff is still working on summer projects, and he's an expert, so we figured that would be helpful. So that was the plan, is to work that through. The examples that we have here are just that, examples. It'll take probably 3 or 4 weeks to finalize things and get it real close. Obviously, the objective would be to have everything in place before January 1st. But again, the principal issue is the method. And if the method's acceptable, we've got a number of examples for various types of property use. To fine tune it and get it all the way home is going to take a bit more work.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Mr. Terry, can you touch on what removing 5113, what issues that could present as far as enforcement of the utility or calculating trip charges?
Yeah, that's a clause that's in quite a few of the transportation utility ordinances that we've reviewed. It is a special inspection warrant. It allows whenever, let's say there's an inspector issue or a number of situations where you're denied entry into a home, it's possible to get a special inspection warrant from the court, actually, that says that you can go on the property. They're super rare. I think I've done like 2 of them and generally, depending on the situation, you don't really want to force the issue. So they're rare, if someone doesn't want you to come on the property. But, and there are other ways to get that information other than actually going on the property. So we try to do those things. But there's been a couple where, mostly in terms of people who aren't cleaning up the yard, and there's some dangerous conditions and if they don't let us in, we've gone to court and gotten an inspection warrant that would allow us to go in and view the property. So it's just a tool that's available to municipalities. So, I guess it's something nice to have. It's probably not absolutely necessary, but it is, as I said, it's something that's in other ordinances. So I would recommend that it stay in, but.
Thank you. I feel like, we're talking about trip generation. The only scenario I can think of where you may need to enter a building is where you take square footage into account if something like that was needed to be hard measured or something? Is there any other scenario where you can see that?
Well, probably not, but it's not entering a building, it's stepping on private property, right? So if you need to leave the street right-of-way, you're on private property, subject to trespass if you don't have permission. So I can't think of too many situations where that would apply with a transportation utility. I guess I concur with Sue's recommendation that it's good to have it there, but if it's a deal breaker, I don't think it's gonna, I don't think we're gonna use that section very often, if at all.
I think, it might be in terms of if a property owner is arguing, well, especially if they have an appeal, and they say, well, we're not in the business of this, or we went out of business, or my home is vacant and we find someone living there. It's probably to verify those types of things. I can think of those situations, but I would think it would be a very rare occurrence. But, those are the types of things. And our assessor, obviously, he deals with that every day in terms of being denied, and so you try to get the information in other ways. But it would be nice to have if needed.
One thing about this is that it is it's more for safety, correct? It was written under the spirit of finding out if somebody lives in an unsafe condition. So it has to do with public safety. I don't see that as being part of the transportation utility.
I would argue that it can be used for those purposes, but we could debate that more, but it's, I agree that that's a good argument that someone can make if there's a special inspection warrant, and obviously they could then contest it at that time, but you read the ordinance, you did your homework. But I would still recommend it, but like I said, I think it would be used rarely, if at all, so I would be okay if you felt more comfortable removing it.
All right, so let's just recap the motion and make sure that everybody knows what we're talking about here. So the motion we have is to accept the proposed transportation utility ordinance minus 51, what was the number, 13? And then the public works, it would not be the public works director, it would be the city engineer spearheading this. Also, to introduce the transportation utility ordinance at the September Common Council meeting and to consider action at the October Council meeting. To notice a specific public comment period at September and/or October Common Council meetings. And to eliminate special assessments for any projects where assessments, hearings, and final resolutions are outstanding at the time of the transportation utility is approved. That's correct?
Yes.
Okay. Any further comments, questions, discussion? We'll go to vote. All in favor, respond with aye.
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. Okay, on to item number 4, review 2022-2026 Public Works Construction CIP. Mr. Eichstadt.
I think I've got this one.
Sorry, Mr. Terry.
So I did send a cover memo, and, again, the idea here is similar, to introduce the proposed CIP, capital improvement plan, for the projects that are recommended from 2022 through 2026. That letter discusses that it's based on what is currently financially possible and proposes to replace nearly 1 mile of street surface per year. That with our robust maintenance program, the city's demonstrated the ability to maintain most local streets for about 50 years. And with a local network of streets comprising about 150 miles, it requires us to maintain about 3 miles a year in order to be sustainable. This CIP does not do that because we currently don't have the financial capacity nor the staff capacity to do that. The process of developing the street CIP includes outreach with the city's utility managers, including water, sanitary, storm, and streets, to obtain a list of priorities for each type of infrastructure. These needs are reviewed, and the highest priority is given to projects wherein the conditions of the utility poses a high probability of failure. CIP is then submitted to the city's utility managers for review and comment after I've got a draft done. And then, of course, because the condition of underground infrastructure is not always known, that plan can change from year to year if priorities change or problems are discovered. We do generally need to lock projects in 2 to 3 years in advance to facilitate planning, survey, and design. There have been some exceptions to that. We want to avoid that as much as possible. The list of projects is in that memo, a little more abbreviated than the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet's a bit cumbersome. Our goal, and we're working with the IT department to graphically show the CIP so that it's color-coded and clickable. We're not there yet. So the spreadsheet goes into detail as far as the construction year that the current infrastructure is. In some cases, it's condition. For streets, the surface rating from 1 to 10. But the summary lists the projects that are recommended from 2022 through 2026. Again, the goal here is to introduce this and give the city council the opportunity to drive these projects, take a look at them, and I'd like to hopefully formally take action next month to approve them, and so we can continue doing our design work and planning work for future projects.
Any questions or comments? Mr. Delaney?
I see that you have this in your spreadsheet. Did you get a total cost on these at all?
No, I don't. I can get you a total, though. Do you want it by utility? Each utilities, for example, the city covers the cost of the streets, the stormwater utility covers the cost of the stormwater. I can certainly present that. Obviously have those numbers, I just need to totalize them from the spreadsheet.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Mr. Blazer, do you have something?
No. Sorry, if I indicated, I apologize.
Okay, hearing no more questions, we'll move on to item number 5. Consider preliminary resolution to reconstruct Oak Street from East Jackson to 16th Street South, 2023 construction. Mr. Eichstadt.
Oak Street is a project that's being proposed for the 2023 Public Works improvements, which include underground infrastructure replacement and new road structure. There's a draft preliminary resolution that's included. It would include, I guess, depending on how things pan out here, but for the time being, improvements would include permanent street surfacing, concrete sidewalk, concrete driveway approach, curb and gutter, and sanitary services. And then in addition, there's a map that just shows the extents of the project. And so we'd be looking for requesting approval of the preliminary resolution.
Any questions or comments by committee? Council? What are the committee's wishes?
I make a motion that we approve a preliminary resolution for, hold on a second. reconstruct Oak Street from East Jackson to 16th Street South for 2023 construction.
I'll second. Any other questions, comments, discussion? Okay, we'll go to vote. All in favor, respond with aye. Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Okay, we will move on to item number 6. Consider allowing staff to review and approve bids for construction of railroad extension to serve Metallico. Mr. Eichstadt?
So the background with this one is we've had a series of delays with the plan design and approval process, which has kind of backed us into a little bit of a corner in relationship to trying to get the project built yet this construction season. Some of the causes for the delays just related to largely to the number of regulatory agencies that are involved with the project. But we've got included in the packet, there's a schedule that's laid out that can still allow us to get there. And the approval process could look several different ways. Those are identified in there as well. It could be that staff is allowed to review, along with the DOT, the low qualified bidder, and make that determination. Or it could be that council could allow the Public Works Committee to review and approve that, the low bidder at the October 5th Public Works meeting. Or a third option would be that a special meeting be scheduled to look at it. So the main, I guess, milestone that we need to try to hit is the installation of the grade crossing on 48th Street, and to make sure that we get that in with asphalt pavement before the plants close mid-November. As I mentioned, the DOT has oversight on this as well. They want to make sure they see all the bids and review it prior to the city's award. And it's financed through the T grant, which is it's state and federal funds, or state and city funds, excuse me, which are capped. So any excess funds or any excess project costs would be paid by the industry. So there isn't further risk to the city approving a bid that's maybe beyond what we're anticipating.
Thank you. Mr. Blazer?
Yeah, I've had meetings with Metallico, and, it's kind of been, usually the first thing they bring up is, so where's the rail extension? And Joe Ikes has done a really good job communicating, and I guess I'm going to ask the committee to, if you can put some trust in the engineering department to maybe allow them to do some approvals and if we can move this along quicker, so we can make sure to hopefully try to hit this deadline, because it is affecting the business out there, and they have to change the way they operate until they can get that railroad spur in. Just something I'm asking and something for you to consider. Thank you.
Yeah, I understand this project has been highly anticipated by Metallico. Obviously, shipping and receiving has been greatly affected. They've made the investment in our community, so expediting this work, I think, is the smartest thing to do. So I will make a motion to allow Public Works staff to review and select a low qualified bidder for the rail extension from Metallico.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other questions or discussion?
I have one question. What % are the city funds for this, and what is the capped rate on this?
Yeah, the cap is $300,000 for the city. That includes some of the engineering work that's already taken place. Total out-of-pocket cap for the city is $300,000. We expect that with the jobs, as long as Metallico quantifies that at the end, that there'll be $400,000 worth of grants from the state, and then they'll cover any balance.
So it's about 50%, 60% funded by the city?
It entirely depends on the bid numbers that come in for construction.
Yeah, also on the city's participation of $300,000, that will be funded through the tax incremental district that that was formed for Metelco, so their development will actually pay for the city's portion of that. That won't come out of the general tax levy.
That helps a lot, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, we'll go to vote. All in favor, respond with aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Okay, on to item number 7, review proposals for soil borings for engineering investigations on Washington Street, Apricot Street, and 1 Mile Creek Pond. Mr. Eichstadt?
Back in August, we solicited three different geotechnical firms for soil borings related to these 3 upcoming projects and investigative work. We reached out to Newman Testing Services. They are no longer doing this sort of drilling operation work, so we didn't get a proposal back from them. Intertech PSI, they provided a proposal on Washington Street. Initially, it was only for Washington Street at a cost of $3,900. Then late this afternoon, they updated that to include Apricot Street, which added another, I think, $3,100. And then AET actually had a proposal that was comprehensive to the things that we were looking for all 3 projects. $5,925 total for the Washington Street work and Apricot Street work, and an additional $5,940 for the 1 Mile Creek Reservoir. And based on the information that we got back with these proposals, we would recommend that AET would be provided this proposal to do this upcoming work for the city.
Thank you. Any questions or comments by committee?
I have a quick question.
Mr.
So,
Blaine?
the one company with Mr. Nannon and I can't say his name, sorry, who replied with a portion of the bid, did you get back in touch with them? Do they know? Because I read your email, it seems pretty clear.
Yeah, so initially, they supplied what they were comfortable supplying. So I did get back to him. He wasn't comfortable supplying the Apricot Street until later, because he wasn't familiar enough with retaining walls to provide any recommendations specific to Apricot Street. So, but I said, well, supply number at least for the drilling part, and he did that.
So are we looking for some action here, Mr. Eichstadt, as far as approving AET's proposal?
Yes.
I'll make a motion to approve AET's proposal for boring on Washington Street, Apricot Street, and 1 Mile Creek Pond.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further questions, comments, or discussion? Hearing none, we'll go to vote. All in favor, respond with aye.
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. Moving on to item number 8, review DPW report, including an update on the 8th Street storm sewer repair. Mr. Terry.
Just one moment, please. All right, so I'm going to, just because it's been a long meeting, the report is available on the city's website, and I want to focus on the 8th Street culvert replacement and rehabilitation that was specifically called out in the agenda. Just wanted to give a summary of that project and some actions that staff took, just so we're transparent about the project. City crews completed the culvert installation in August, and we're working to have restoration complete by or shortly after Labor Day. There still is a little bit of work on some of the private entrances to take care of yet. 2 bids were received on that project with a low qualified bidder of $352,000 for installation, with the city providing the materials, making the total project $399,000. This is about $289,000 over the engineering estimate for the total project. The Common Council gave the staff authority to approve the lowest qualified bid, but considering the high cost, staff elected to deny all bids. And given the deterioration that was happening much faster than expected, plans were revamped to facilitate expeditious construction with city crews. So we pulled off of our 18th Avenue project to facilitate this. So instead of slip lining and using pumped grout into the void space between the old pipe and the new pipe that would have kept 8th Street open, city crews open cut the trench. This also resulted in the necessity to repave the patch area, which was not part of the initial project scope. As it turns out, as pavement was removed, large voids were discovered outside of the old pipe underneath the surface, which would not have been filled using the originally planned slip line and grout method. So at the end of the day, this open cut method was the proper way to make this repair with the highest level of structural integrity. Just days before the asphalt patch was ready to be paved, the city's asphalt contractor submitted a change order proposal. We have a bid with them for all of our asphalt work. While the unit price was slightly less than the unit price for patchwork for the existing contract, which is beneficial, the total price of asphalt was $49,350. This change order resulted in the asphalt contract increasing by 13%. City policy allows for staff to approve change orders up to 8%. Because staff knew the need to pave the patch could not be averted, the staff involved the mayor's office to collectively approve the change order in spite of the policy limitations, believing the actions were urgent in nature and would meet the spirit of the policy in this case. This has been something that's been discussed in the past, for these types of projects, what's appropriate action for staff to take on short notice when there's just not time to pull together a committee and council meeting for, important operational decisions such as this. So at a future meeting, may be desirable to include a referral item to readdress this policy. While there still are some bills that have yet to be submitted, staff's estimated the total project will be no more than $165,000. While it is more than the initial estimate of $110,000, it's $234,000 less than the bid price. And I think that's, it tells a story very well for our engineering staff to make some immediate scope changes, and our construction staff and supervisors to make a sudden change in their work and get this done as expeditiously as they did.
And also just want to include is, that benefit of having our own construction crew to be able to shift priorities that quickly. And like Joe just said, with our engineering department, I cannot say enough. And I think how fast they wrapped up that project. And if you saw the crater next to the road there, this was a potential serious hazard. And having that ability to adjust on the fly like that with our own construction crew is a great asset to our community.
Yeah, so I just wanted to also compliment all the staff. I think it really shines a good light on their professionalism and abilities and service to the community. But I did want to point out that that technically, by approving that asphalt change order, that was technically a policy violation, and I didn't want that to be unknown.
And Joe did contact me about this, and we had a discussion, and I ultimately said, go ahead and do it, because, as versus potentially getting asphalt the next day, and I think it was the day after that because of the rain weather, we'd still be, with gravel on 8th Street right now waiting to get approvals. So I think by doing that, we were able to safely get that street back open a lot sooner.
So if there's any other specific questions about that item or anything else in the report, I'd be happy to answer them.
No, that's a great job, being able to take that project onto the city's shoulders, having the flexibility to be able to get work like that done. That's quite the cost savings. And like you said, there was some unknown void there that would not have been repaired. So the result may have been a faulty product if we had gone to bids as well. So great job with that. Okay, moving on. Review the referral list. Item number 9, Mr. Terry.
Thanks. One moment. Gotta get to the right page here. All right, so we still have item number 1, a request from Alderperson Tom Rion to discuss the future of 8th Street South. That was back from 2016. Alderperson Rion was present tonight. With our action, we certainly are making a start at that, although there's a long way to go. So I guess the question I have is, does the committee want to refer this or ask Alderperson Rion his position on this? Or do we want to dispose of this item for now and know that it's on our radar?
Mr. Rion?
I like to see it left, I can go either way with it. I like to see it left in writing so it doesn't fall off the radar, as long as whoever's on the committee knows that it's there. And I, Joe, appreciate, I think what you said earlier, talking about doing the project from the south end to Whitrock, where that will be nice to do. That's the easy portion.
Right.
The tough portion is the other end. And so if people thought there's a lot of money being spent on the south end, there's a lot more that's going to be needed for the rest of that project from north-south. So as long as it's, that we don't forget about it, because sooner or later, the street's going to collapse, or could.
Right.
The infrastructure, it's not just the street that you look at and drive on. It's the infrastructure underneath. That street's over 50 years old. It's past its lifetime. It's past, not just its lifetime, it's probably past its lifetime for, I think, what probably people thought the capacity was for traffic to be on it, the number of vehicles. So, as long as we don't forget about it, because it's the main, from the south is the main entryway into the city. At one point in time, talked about an alternate bypass route, which hasn't gone anywhere either, around the city, which is going to go back in the back of the football field and that, along 20th Street and that, to Z. So to come up to do things that are new, it appears to be harder than to try and repair what we have. And so that we keep this on the radar, because I'm not going to be here forever, even though it seems like it. Yeah, I know. That this has become, and this is one that, this goes back to when I was in high school. I walked this street before it was done. So if you want to take it off, it's fine with me. Just keep it in your minds. Don't let the state forget about it. Don't let yourselves forget about it. Now that was the reason I think that I wanted to keep it left on there in writing, so that as you went over the referrals, different committees, that you'd look at it all the time, so you didn't forget about it, because it's from the south end, it's the way into town. And if you're coming into other ways, it's the way to get out of town. Well, to use it, it's transportation in town too, but people coming and going, it's in and out. So it's you know, it's a vital part of the corridor system in the community, and however we can move this along, and as you're seeing with the south end, what that's projected, when that's projected to be done, who knows when this other end, and, you know, the rest will be done. Hopefully I live long enough to see it. So whichever way you want to go with it, just keep it in.
I'll say I agree with Mr. Rayom. 8th Street is main artery of Wisconsin Rapids with numerous businesses lined up and down, and the state of it is very poor. And it's an eyesore, to say the least. So, in my opinion, I think it should stay top of the list right where it's at.
I think number 2 we could get rid of. Number 4 is an item that has been on this list for a while. There was some dysfunction in developing agendas and referral process in the past. You know, we can bring this up, and what we've been doing seems to be working. We could kind of create a policy out of what we're currently doing and let the committee review that. I think that could stay on there. Number 5 is still being done. The reason that study's taking so long is because of COVID. School wasn't active, and so number 5 is still in play. Number 7, I think we can eliminate. We're well into the transportation utility. And number 9 and 11 are still underway. Those are 2 separate, while they both deal with parking, those are 2 separate referrals. So I think we want to keep those on there.
Sounds good to me. So we could remove item number 2
And 7.
and 7. Any questions, concerns, comments? Okay, moving on. Item number 10, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion
I'll second.
and a second. All in favor? Aye. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.